Okay, well, welcome to the last presentation of today. I think I'm in a pretty special position because I'm not only the one that's paying for the beer because I'm the treasurer of Declarative Amsterdam, but I'm also the one standing between you and the beer. So let's get started. Um, I'm going to talk today about domain-specific languages which are implemented using an XProc engine written in the XProc language. And maybe now you're thinking, people who attend other conferences, hey Eric, haven't I heard you talk about that before? And then you're correct. I have talked about this subject before on Market UK 2023 and on XProc this year in June. However, these talks were about very specific domain-specific language implementations. And this talk will be much more generic, much more about how do you do these kinds of things in general. So it will contain a number of tips and tricks and some advice from the trenches. And I promise you this will be the last talk about this subject I will do in any coming conferences, but I will probably find some other hobby horse to bore you with. This is also not going to be an XProc tutorial. I know people are not very familiar with the language. Most people are not very familiar with the language, but the code examples are simple and I will try to explain them. So don't worry. And as Stephen said, I suppose you're all intelligent enough to follow me. If you ever want to know more about this language, you want to learn it, there's a full tutorial in the Declarative Amsterdam archives of 2021. And you can also look at xproc.org, which is the official website of XProc, which has an extensive learning page where we gathered all learning materials about XProc. Because the code examples are simple, it also means the code is simplified. So in reality, if you write a real domain-specific language program, it will probably be much more complex. So see the code examples here more to whet your appetite than something you can actually just copy and paste into your script. This is me. I'm an independent consultant working from the Netherlands. I do XML only. I wrote 3 XML-related books, one together with Adam Redder about Exist. And I'm also a member of the XProc editorial committee, so I'm probably a bit biased about the language, but okay, take it from me, I think it's really a good choice. Domain-specific languages. What you see here is what Wikipedia says about it, a bit shortened. And let's take out some bits. What is a DSL? A DSL is a computer language which is specialized for a particular domain. So it's in contrast to general purpose languages. And it allows you to express what you want to express for your domain much more clearly than you can do in a general purpose languages. And hopefully you can program much faster, have less bugs, stuff like that. But of course this comes with a cost because you have to implement your domain-specific language. So you must only use it for problems that appear sufficiently often, or in other words, where there is a business case for implementing your domain-specific language. How does it work? Of course, you have a source. Yeah, you write your program, you have a source code or multiple source code files. And there's somebody editing them or somebody's editing them, these things. And once you have edited them, you need an engine to actually execute and let the DSL do its magic. And while it's doing its magic, you probably want feedback, either during that it's running or at the end, maybe about the status of whatever it did. And beside this, you also, of course, have to design and implement the language. Somebody has to create a language, somebody has to create the DSL engine. That doesn't come for free. Now, talking about DSLs that you can run on XProc, what kind of DSLs are we talking about? For instance, DSLs that do things like create, move documents, create complex structures on your disk. And I think there are enough examples for that in reality, or on the web. Inspecting, transforming documents, for instance, creating documentation or publishing documents. little bit more, maybe more task-oriented processing, like what Ant is doing, but not as generic as Ant is doing it. Handling these XML in zip formats like Office documents, which is also a very good example of what XProc can do for you. Office documents are XML in zip, jar files are are zip files with some XML in it. Orchestrating web services is also an example because it has a very beautiful HTTP request thingy. Okay, about DSLs. And the next sheet, this sheet, is probably preaching for the choir, right? XML, I think XML is a very good choice as a base language for domain-specific languages. And why? Well, it of course has a very well understood syntax. It has a very well understood type of semantics. It's extensible. No, we all know that. And as a designer, you can define your DSL by writing a schema. And if you annotate it right, you directly have documentation, which is nice. And as a user, you can use this schema in a schema-aware editor to write a DSL with schema support, which hopefully makes you make less errors in writing the DSL. And for the implementer, there are many programming languages, of course, that support XML. I think almost all modern programming languages support XML. And there are, of course, languages that are specifically geared towards processing XML, like XProc. Some examples, Ant is one, Maven config, Spring config, all kinds of DSLs, which are all written in XML. Another example I would like to mention is that Peter Lamer's company, Benjamin's, has a DSL called Mira, on which they run almost all their business processes. And it also runs on XProc. XProc 1 anyway. We're talking now about XProc 3. Okay, XProc. I think XProc is a pretty good choice for running a DSL, for implementing and executing a DSL written in XML. What is XProc if you don't know it? XProc is a language for processing documents. So you take one document or more documents and you push it into something called a pipeline. And the pipeline processes, changes the document, works on it, works based on the data in the document, whatever. Pipeline consists of steps. And you have all kinds of steps in XProc. For instance, you have simple stuff. If you have an XML document, you can work on the XML, like adding nodes, deleting nodes, whatever. But you also have complex steps, like do this, validate this XML. It's just one instruction and it validates your XML. Or do the X includes, or XSLT. You can communicate with web services, also using steps. And very important for DSLs, you can manipulate files and directories. Pipelines can loop, they are not limited to linear execution. They can loop, fork, merge. And if you do that well, it actually executes in parallel. That's nice to see. And of course, you need an execution engine for XProc. XProc is, of course, a language. The currently only one available is Morgana. Just Google Morgana XProc and you'll find it. The Calibrate 3 seems to be on the way, but it has been for months, for years. So let's just hope that Norm finishes it quickly. Anyway, this fish there is the XProc logo. It's called Canava, which is not only a nice word, but also Finnish for pipeline. Okay, what do you do when you process a DSL in XProc? There are a number of steps that I take, that I do when I process a DSL. And I've written, I think, 3 DSL engines now. One thing is you process your includes. I'll come back to all these things later. Then you validate what you have to avoid garbage in situations. Then you prepare stuff, and what I mean with that I'll come back to later. And then of course you need to execute your DSL, whatever your DSL must do. And you then, during or after your processing, you want to produce some feedback about the DSL running. Let's talk about the inclusion thing. And that is of course not including, it's about adding modularity to your DSL. That's important. Because why? Because maybe you want to reuse pieces of your DSL code. And not only that, sometimes your DSL source gets pretty big and you want to break it up into manageable chunks. And of course, sometimes you even have includes in includes or modules that are used by other modules. To do this, XProc supports the X-include standard. And X-include is a very simple standard. There's more to it than I'm now going to tell you, but this is the gist of it. What you do in your source, you write xi include href is to some file. Xi must of course be bound to the right namespace. And in your XProc program, you do two things, or my advice would be to do two things. The first thing is you say pay X-include. So your program with X-include runs through the X-include step. And what it actually does, it dereferences, it processes all the X-includes in your file and the X-includes in the files that are included, and etc., etc., etc. So it dereferences all your X-includes. And after that, as an advice, please do a pit XML base, because what that does, it records where all the files came from in XML base attributes, which is kind of handy. We'll get back to that later. Now, just I think this is pretty simple, but just to make it more clear, here we have a file with an X-include. Here we have the file that we're including, and we run this through these two steps. And what happens is this: as you can see, the file is included, and we now have XML base attributes on the root elements of every main file. And why is that important? Well, it's handy when debugging. You probably want to write this file as an intermediate file to disk so you can inspect it, so you can see where the sources came from. And you also sometimes need it to resolve URIs in your source because they were relative to the location where the file came from. So you need that. So that's actually almost all about adding modularity to your DSL. However, there's one gotcha. When I write code, I usually have schemas and schematrons that check my file while I'm editing. And the references to these schemas and schematrons are hard-coded in the files. And this is the way it's usually done. This is an XSI schema location that points to the schema file. And this is an XML model processing instruction which points to your schematron file, if you have it. And if you do, these references are usually relative. So once you've done all your X-includes, they're no longer valid because the files come from different locations. The references are invalid. And also what I've noticed that sometimes these references, which are now all over the place, because on the root of every included file, they get in the way. They have all kinds of side effects you don't want. So what you want to do is you want to remove them, which is in XProc pretty easy. You do a delete delete all XSI attributes from your file, which are gone. And while you're busy, why not delete the namespace XSI altogether, because you don't need it any longer. This is not necessary, but it's a nice cleanup. And you delete all processing instructions called XML model. And now you have a clean file without any schema references in it anymore. After this, we need to validate. So we have a validation, which is of course about avoiding garbage in. And this is the XProc instruction, XProc step that validates it for you, and it works. Here's a gotcha. If this validation fails, you get an error message, and this is the example. This is not very nice. It's an enormous blob of XML that pops up on your screen, and you think, what happened? So my advice would be, if you validate in XProc, simplify your error messages. And here's how you do it. You use the try-catch instruction. You validate within the try, and in the catch, you re-raise the error, but only pick out the interesting bit. In this case, we only pick out the first error message. And maybe now you're thinking, there may be more than one error message. You're correct, but usually when you you have a validation error, you load the offending file in your editor and look at the red squiggly lines. your editor gives you. You don't look at the error messages you get as a dump on your screen when you run your DSL. So this is usually enough. It's an indication something went wrong. Oh, it's probably that. Let's load the file. For me, that's usually enough. I usually also do schematron validation. And this is the validate with schematron instruction. And you do this for checking things like identifier references and all kinds of more complicated stuff. Again, you need to simplify the error message because for schematron it's even worse than for schema. I don't know if you know that if you do the official schematron validation produces an SVRL file, a schematron validation reporting language file, which is an XML file with a whole load of information in it about what schematron has been doing. Is usually enormous. So if you get an error in schematron, you get the whole SVRL dumped on your console. Not very nice. So again here, we simplify the error message with the same technique, and now we only take the first failed assert message from our SVRL, which is enough just to tell us, okay, something went wrong. Let's load the stuff in the editor and find out what's wrong. Then we get to the prepare step. And what do I mean with that? If you process a DSL, it usually means accessing resources, files on disk, web services, stuff like that. These things have URIs. And these pass-through URIs are often implicit, and that's because it's a DSL. It says, something says, handle a special file, and your domain knows that the special files is in the special directory or something like that. And there are lots and lots of these kinds of things that are implicit to your domain that must be resolved. So but my suggestion is to compute every URI upfront and make them absolute. So put all this domain-specific knowledge into an upfront computation and record these in additional attributes or elements or whatever. I'll show you an example later on. This is usually not a task for XProc itself because XSLT is much better for this because often these kinds of computations are complex and need to look in the prologue and stuff like that. So my experience is that do it in an XSLT. So here's an example. We have some DSL, and in the DSL is an add special document instruction. Your domain knows what an add special document instruction should do. And in this case, we need to copy a file from some special source to some special target. Relatively simple. So what we do in our preparation XSLT, we compute these paths and we add them in special, in some additional attributes to the add special document. My convention is to put an underscore in front of all these in the names of the special attributes, but that's just my convention. And if you have this, you can in XProc much easier do this. This is the code to copy all these special documents. So the XProc can just lift the computed URIs from your extended source code and do what it has to do. There's one handy XProc stop I would like to mention for preparation. If you already have an attribute with, for instance, an href or a file name instead of it, then XProc has the pay make absolute URIs step, which you can say, okay, I want all the add special document href attributes made relative to this URI, and the result after that step will be this, so your URI will become absolute. Then we have to execute our DSL, right? We have prepared it, and now we can go and do it. Okay, so we have stuff in it. And here's an example. We have an action attribute that has to do something. My advice is to iterate over your actions using a pay viewport instruction in XProc. And pay viewport, what does that do? In this case, for instance, you have a viewport over the action elements. And what pay viewport actually does it takes the element that matched, so which matched the match attribute of viewport, and inside the viewport, that becomes the document it sees. It becomes the only thing which is accessible within the inside in the viewport. That's not really important. What's more important, what happens after the viewport, because whatever you change in that piece of pipeline within the viewport, it gets reinserted in your original document, which gives you the opportunity to leave status information. For instance, you can add an attribute, status is okay, or status is something, or number of document processes 10, or that kind of information you can leave out and it will be automatically reinserted back into your original document. So after you've done all your actions, you can analyze your information and see what happens. Here's some more advice about how to do this. Here's another example of a simple DSL with actions this and actions that. And if you put it in a viewport, you can do it like this. So you have a choose, which inspects the document coming in, the element coming in, sees this or that, and does whatever this and that should do. So you need a p choose. And there's one thing to this. If you think this is ugly code, yes, it is. XProc has no templating mechanism like XSLT. I would love to do this with some kind of applied template stuff that you can just throw the element into the air and that some template picks it up. XProc has no such mechanism. So you need to write ugly dispatching code. Well, maybe we're going to fix that in version 4. I don't know. Yeah. Oh.
Testing. Oh, okay, Ricky, thank you. You said something about actions take the output and re-input.
Yeah.
Could you review that again, please?
Sure. This one. Yeah.
But in the context of your example, though.
In this context.
In your example of this and that. So.
Yeah.
So it will.
All right. First thing to realize is that in the p viewport, only the matched element is visible, right? Everything surrounding it is no longer visible. It's not there. In the viewport, you only see the document that's matched in the match attribute. Or what's matched in the match attribute becomes the document inside the viewport. Then a pipeline processes documents, so it can change it. For instance, you can add attributes or whatever. You can do whatever you like. And after, let's say, this element is processed in the viewport, it gets reinserted where it came from. So that does this work? Yeah. Does it?
So I would. And those who know XProc, please forgive me for asking this. But so my on the right, under self this, I would create output that has that as a document element, and then it would get reprocessed and then that resulting document would be acted on by the second when.
No. So it doesn't work like that. So the actions, the match is on the original document, right?
There's a question also in the chat.
Yeah.
It says more precise viewport matches piped would come close to template matching. Is that right? That was from Geert Borman.
I think I have to chat with Geert about that. I don't know.
I'll go offline.
Okay, but maybe we can chat about it under the beer, right? Okay, I'm over time, so I'll speed up. There's almost. Then last thing we want to do is provide feedback to the user, right? Is this thing running anyway? Is it doing something? And what you can do in XProc 3 is add a message attribute to every step, which just outputs this message on the console. So here we have the XSLT, preparing XSLT, which just says a message, I'm preparing. XProc also has a p-identity step, which does nothing. It just takes the input and outputs the input, which is actually very useful in several situations. But you can also use it to produce messages like I'm doing here. What actually would happen down here is that these three messages will just pop out of your console. Or you can also do the XSL message inside an XSLT. If you have a long-running XSLT and you want feedback about what it is doing, you can also use the XSL message instruction in XSLT. Everything is dumped on your console. And what you see here, what you see here is one of my DSLs running, and this is actually all message output, just telling me that the thing is doing something and it is working and it's not stuck, because at least this DSL run can take minutes. There's a second way of providing feedback, which is writing additional documents to your disk. You will probably want to write a document after you processed all includes back to your disk just for inspection. Is it correct? Am I okay with this? But maybe there are other things you want to write to your disk. And therefore that XProc has a pstore step, which in this very simple case just writes a file to disk, and pstore is also actually acts like an identity in your pipeline. So the document comes in the pstore, flows out at the other ends, and in the meantime it's written to disk. It's like a Unix T command, if you're familiar. That in your pipeline it does nothing. And then there's a third way to provide feedback, which is because usually a DSL engine does its magic on the way. And what actually flows out of your pipeline is not interesting. It's just what flows out of your pipeline. So you can use that to provide yourself with status information. For instance, so you can use that to show everything about status and stuff like that. Now, how do you do that in XProc? Let's have a look. And as a bonus, I will show you how to tell your user how long your pipeline has been running. So here we have an empty pipeline, and we have an output port defined, which you need to do because you want to output something. Because we want the time, we start by recording when it started. Then we do whatever we want to do. And finally, and here's where, for instance, the p-identity becomes useful. We have a p-identity in which we put a document with just a DSL execute element, which tells you how, that the status was okay, and I assume you stored that in a $status variable, and it computes the duration by subtracting the start time from the current date and time. And in this case, it runs in 1 minute and 23 seconds. Okay, as a wrap up, my personal opinion is that XML is a very good base format for domain-specific languages, that XProc in most cases can be a good engine to implement it on. And there are several phases, standard phases you have to implement when you write a DSL engine. If you need any help with XProc steps, which can be hard to understand in the standard, please refer to my new toy project called xprocref.org, in which I try to document all XProc steps in a more user-friendly way than the standard itself does, because the standard was written for XProc engine implementers and not for XProc users. And I'm trying to amend this on xprocref.org. So this was what I want to tell you about domain-specific languages on XProc. It was good to talk to you, and if you have any questions, please shout. Yeah.
So is there an IXML step?
There is an IXML step in XProc, yes.
So in fact, the first step could be turning the non-XML programming language, DSL, into XML version.
Yes, that could be possible, yeah. But then you miss the thing that the people editing the domain-specific language have schema support in the editor, which can be quite handy.
Oh, something on that.
Mohammed,
Norm has a question.
thank you for this presentation. First, I have a comment. I think there is a command say that say that we need 5 fruits and 5 legumes, whatever.
Yeah.
And 3 Erik a day. I think that's the typical
3 Erics a
ratio.
day, keep the doctor away.
Yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to say. And the second is that why XProc?
Because I think it's a good choice for implementing these kinds of things.
Okay.
Do you have a different suggestion?
I have a lot of different suggestions.
Okay.
Okay,
Let's
that's
talk about
probably
it.
for a beer.
Yeah.
Is there a question on Zoom?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a question from Norm. He says, I'm curious about what sort of templating would help here. Shame I can't join for a beer this evening.
I think he refers to the dispatching code in the viewport. I'm not sure either yet.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
okay.
sorry, Eric. My ears blinked at the
We
wrong
can't hear you,
moment,
Norm.
and I missed.
Can't hear you, Norm.
Precisely.
You're muted.
I'm muted. Well, I'm not muted on my end.
Norm,
I heard you fine.
are you there?
He is here. He's trying
I'm
to
here.
talk.
Can you hear me now?
We can't hear
Steve?
you yet. Maybe somebody in the control room needs to switch.
Maybe. People on Zoom say they can hear me, so I think it's on your
We
end.
don't. What?
Hello?
It's on your side, Norm. It's not on our side that we can't
I
hear
don't
you.
believe you. I think so. I mean, I claim to be unmuted. Never
Sure.
mind.
No, never mind. Well, thumbs up. I think Erik has a question for Erik.
I have just a question. Maybe I don't understand it completely because it's all quite new to me. But you were talking about DSLs, but I somehow missed a specification of a grammar or something like that. I would expect a grammar and interpreting that and making a runtime. And I mean, I missed.
No, it's because it was not in the presentation. A DSL is a domain-specific language. The grammar depends on your domain. And you usually implement the grammar if you use XML as base in a schema. So this is not about a particular DSL, it's about DSLs in general, for which the grammar will vary.
Anybody else? Thank you, Erik.
Okay.